Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we are looking at a really compelling stack of notes drawn from a recent pastor's message, specifically covering these passages from Genesis and the Gospel of John. And our mission for this deep dive is to basically figure out how this deeply ingrained human habit, our tendency to tie memories and emotions to physical locations, has accidentally caused us to completely misunderstand how, and honestly where, we actually experience God.
Yeah, it's a really fascinating premise, I think, because it touches on something that is just so universal. We all have this geographic memory.
Oh, we really do. Like, you can be walking down a busy street, right, and you pass by a specific Italian restaurant on the corner, and instantly, without even trying, you remember the exact sound of a friend's laugh from a dinner you shared there like 5 years ago.
Right, exactly.
Or you find yourself standing in a particular terminal at the airport and your body actually physically reacts. Mm-hmm. You are just transported right back to that really heavy emotional moment of saying a tearful goodbye to someone you love.
Yeah, that is the psychology of space. Places hold our stories. Our most profound, life-altering moments are almost always pinned to a literal map. We say things like, we first met there, or our child was born in that specific hospital room.
Yes, totally.
So it's incredibly natural to associate physical space with emotional weight. And as the pastor shared with us in this week's message, we naturally, almost unconsciously, apply that exact same geographic memory to our spiritual lives.
Right. And here's the analogy I just keep coming back to with this. We often treat God's presence like a Wi-Fi router.
Oh, that's good. Yeah.
Right? We think, okay, I'm sitting in the sanctuary on Sunday morning, the music is playing, the community is around me, I have full bars, the signal is incredibly strong. But the moment we leave the building, the moment we step out into the church parking lot and get in our cars, we feel like the signal drops.
It just disappears.
Exactly. It's like we are wandering around trying to hold on to this spiritual signal before we drive into Monday's chaotic traffic. And we start to wonder, is God actually more present in one place than another?
And if we really sit with that question, it causes a lot of underlying discomfort. Because if we assume the answer to that is yes, then logically we have to admit that God might be less present in a sterile hospital room when you're waiting for test results.
Oh, wow.
Or that he's utterly absent when you are sitting alone, just overwhelmed in a tiny apartment. But this anxiety about losing the signal, it isn't some modern invention. Humanity has been agonizing over the question of where is God since the absolute dawn of recorded history.
Which brings us to the first source text from the pastor's notes today. Because when we look for the very first time a specific place becomes significant in Scripture, it really isn't what you'd expect.
Not at all.
We aren't looking at some magnificent temple or a grand sanctuary filled with thousands of worshipers. We are looking at a barren desert in Genesis 28, during literally the darkest night of one man's life.
Yeah, the story of Jacob. And to really grasp why this particular moment in the wilderness is so revolutionary, we have to kind of step out of our modern mindset for a second and understand the ancient Near Eastern worldview.
Okay, get the scene for us.
So, in the ancient world, people firmly believed that gods were highly territorial. There was a god of the mountain, a god of the valley, a god of the river. Divine beings had jurisdictions, much like our modern political borders.
Right.
So if you wanted to interact with a particular deity, you had to travel to their specific turf.
Okay, so I think we all know the basic Sunday school plot of Jacob, right? He's a deceiver, he cons his brother Esau, he steals the blessing, and then he just has to run for his life.
Just completely takes off.
Exactly. But what we often miss, I think, is the psychological terror of that geography. If gods are bound to specific territories, Jacob must have thought he was running completely off the map.
Oh, absolutely. He is fleeing his homeland, leaving his family's territory. So in his mind, he isn't just physically alone in the desert. He is stepping completely outside of his God's jurisdiction.
He is spiritually naked.
That is a really profound way to frame it. He is entirely unprotected. He is so physically and emotionally exhausted in this desolate place that, he uses a literal stone for a pillow. He wasn't looking to set up an altar or have some deep spiritual retreat. He just collapsed.
He's just trying to survive the night.
Right. And that makes the original Hebrew text of this passage absolutely captivating. In Genesis 28, the scripture keeps repeating one specific word over and over, and that word is makom.
Makom.
Yeah, and it simply means the place. It says he came to a certain makom, he took a stone of that makom. It refuses to give the location a proper name at first, which draws all of the reader's attention almost violently to the physical space itself.
So it's basically forcing us to look at the dirt and the rocks.
Precisely. It wants us to see the barrenness. And then Jacob falls asleep and has this famous dream of a ladder stretching between heaven and earth.
Right, with the angels.
Yeah, we usually focus all our attention on the angels going up and down, but the text describes God at the top of the ladder using a very deliberate Hebrew word. The word is nitzav.
Nitzav, what does that translate to?
It means to stand firmly, to remain steadfast, to stand without leaving. It carries this beautiful, resonant idea of being faithfully present. So Jacob was running away in an absolute panic, but God was nitzav.
Oh, wow.
God was steadfastly waiting. Jacob thought he was leaving God behind, but God didn't move with the geography. God was already there.
Okay, wait, let me push back on this for a second, or at least, play devil's advocate here. Because if God is nitzav, if he is already standing there, steadfast in the middle of a random desert, why did God later command the Israelites to build the tabernacle?
That's a great question.
Right, because we get entire books of the Bible detailing the exact dimensions for a literal tent where God supposedly lives. So why have a literal Holy of Holies if every patch of dirt in the wilderness is equally holy? That just seems a little contradictory.
No, it's a brilliant question, and it strikes right at the heart of the tension between God's omnipresence and his manifest presence. Think of it this way. The tabernacle, and later the temple, they were not built because God needed a house.
No.
They were built because human beings have terrible spiritual attention spans. We are very physical, sensory creatures. So the tabernacle was essentially a concession to human weakness. It gave the Israelites a focal point, a physical space to direct their attention toward a God who is invisible and infinite.
Oh, I see.
But the danger, of course, is that over time, they began to confuse the focal point with the entirety of God's presence. They thought they had effectively boxed him in.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
Yeah.
It wasn't about containing God. It was about concentrating our own attention.
Yeah.
Which totally shifts how we view Jacob's reaction when he finally wakes up.
Yes.
Because in Genesis 28, verse 16, he makes this incredible confession. He says, surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it. He doesn't say, wow, God rushed down here tonight to save me. He just says, I didn't know.
And that, I think, is perhaps the single greatest misunderstanding in our modern faith. God didn't rush to the wilderness because Jacob finally fell asleep on a rock. God was already there.
Yeah.
We constantly assume God is absent from our pain or our mundane routines, so we try to drag him to where we are. We think our passionate prayers act like some kind of tractor beam to pull God out of the sky. But our prayers do not make God arrive. They just help us recognize a presence that was already there all along.
Let's actually ground this with an analogy, because I think the mechanics of this are so crucial for us to grasp. Think about how night vision goggles work.
Oh, I like this.
Right. When you put them on in a pitch black room, the goggles do not generate new light. They don't magically beam a spotlight into the darkness. What they do, they take ambient light that is already present in the room light, that is just completely invisible to the naked human eye, and they amplify it so you can finally see the furniture and the people around you.
Right. The furniture didn't just teleport into the room.
Exactly. The furniture didn't suddenly appear the moment you put the goggles on. It was there the whole time.
I love that. That's a perfect way to picture it.
And as the pastor shared with us, that is what prayer and worship actually are. They're an amplifier for ambient grace. Mm-hmm. You aren't creating a spiritual signal out of nothing. You are just tuning your internal receptors to the frequency of a room that is already occupied.
That beautifully illustrates the shift from relocation to revelation. It's never about moving God. It's about opening our eyes. And this realization was so staggering for the ancient Israelites that as time passed, they actually began using that exact Hebrew word for place, hamakam, the place, as a covenant name for God himself.
Wait, they used the place as a name for God? That is a massive paradigm shift.
It is the ultimate paradigm shift. It means they finally grasped that it isn't that God exists somewhere tucked away within the world. It is that the world exists entirely within God.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, you see this articulated centuries later in Isaiah 66, where God says, "Heaven is my throne, earth is my footstool." Or when King Solomon builds his magnificent temple in Jerusalem. In his dedication prayer, Solomon has this moment of striking clarity and admits, "Behold, heaven and the highest heaven cannot contain you, how much less this house that I have built."
Wow.
No building can contain God because God contains the building.
As the pastor pointed out, we constantly walk around asking, where is God? And God is essentially looking back at us asking, where am I not?
Yes, which perfectly sets up the next crucial phase of our deep dive today. Because intellectually, the ancient Israelites understood this concept of Hamakom, but human nature is just so stubborn.
It really is.
Century after century passed, they built their massive temple, and they fell right back into the exact same geographic turf war trap. They went right back to arguing over which mountain had the strongest Wi-Fi signal.
Right, which brings us to the New Testament, specifically John chapter 4. We see Jesus walk right into the middle of this ancient, exhausted debate with a woman at a well. Beautifully enough, it's Jacob's well, like the exact same Jacob we just left sleeping on a rock in the wilderness.
The continuity there is just incredible. So Jesus is sitting at the well, and he strikes up a conversation with a Samaritan woman. Now, she asks him a question that seems purely on the surface to be about geography. She says, "Our ancestors worshipped on this mountain, but you Jews say the place where people must worship is in Jerusalem."
Yeah, and we all know the classic Sunday school version of this story, right? She has been married 5 times. She is currently living with a man who isn't her husband, and she is basically an outcast in her town. But what we often gloss over is the spatial psychology of this scene.
Break that down a bit.
Well, she is at the well at noon, the blistering heat of the day. In the ancient world, the well was like the community water cooler. The women of the village would naturally go in the cool of the morning or the evening. It was a whole social event.
All right, so to go at noon means she is making a very deliberate, very painful calculation.
Exactly. She is choosing the physical agony of the midday sun over the social agony of being whispered about and judged by her neighbors.
Yeah.
That is how deep her shame ran. So when she brings up this high-level theological debate about mountains versus Jerusalem, it's not really about theology at all, is it?
Not at all. It was a complete smokescreen. And Jesus doesn't take the bait because he hears the hidden, trembling question beneath the religious debate. She was well-versed in the arguments of her day, but her true painful question wasn't, where is God? It was, would God even be willing to meet someone like me?
Oh, that just hits so hard.
It does. And the way Jesus responds is just a masterclass in compassion. A Jewish rabbi speaking to a Samaritan woman in public broke every social, gender, and religious rule of the first century. But he doesn't just speak to her, he asks her for a drink. That is the pivotal mechanism of this entire encounter. Most readers assume Jesus was just physically thirsty. But by asking an outcast for water, he was completely subverting the power dynamic. He was actively restoring her dignity.
Because she was so used to being looked down on.
Exactly. Think about the psychology of isolation. When a person is continually looked down upon, when they're only ever viewed as a sinner or a charity case, something deep inside them begins to collapse. The moment you believe you are no longer needed by anyone, you kind of lose your humanity.
So by asking for her help, Jesus rebuilds her worth. He didn't lead with a harsh accusation. He didn't give some lofty lecture about temple purity laws. He made himself vulnerable to someone whose deepest fear was that she was completely unvalued. He met her first as a person of immeasurable worth.
And only after he restores her inherent dignity does he finally circle back to her smokescreen question about geography and worship. And when he does, he redefines the concept entirely. He tells her in John 4:23 that true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth.
Right. And I know spirit and truth is one of those famous phrases we hear all the time in church, but in the original Greek, those words carry a lot more weight than we usually give them. The word for truth, aletheia, means something much more uncomfortable than just not telling a lie, right? It actually means being exposed.
That is exactly right. The word for spirit is pneuma, which isn't just a distant theological concept. It means breath, life, the absolute deepest center of your being.
Okay.
And aletheia literally translates to that which has been uncovered or brought into the light. In our modern religious culture, we usually try to dress up for God. We put on our Sunday best, we offer these sanitized, cleaned up prayers. But Jesus is telling this woman that God has zero interest in sanitized perfection.
He is saying, bring your actual, unvarnished, messy self.
Yes. God doesn't need you to trek to a specific holy mountain. He is looking for people who come to him completely uncovered, with nothing hidden in the dark, bringing the deepest center of their being into the light.
You know, when you synthesize all the source material the pastor brought to us today, this staggering pattern emerges. Just look at who God meets and where.
Yeah, it's pretty undeniable.
Right. Jacob is met while he is literally running away, a deceitful fugitive sleeping in the dirt. The Samaritan woman is met at the absolute peak of her shame, actively hiding from her community. Zacchaeus is met while hiding up in a tree because he is despised by his city. Peter is met on the beach after his greatest, most heartbreaking failure, having denied he even knew Jesus.
The common thread weaving through every single one of those encounters is that God is the initiator. God finds us in our worst, most hidden moments.
Jesus never once says, clean yourself up first, get your act together, and meet me at the temple when you're ready.
Never. And that just disrupts how we typically talk about our faith. We so often use the phrase, I found God, as if it were our own grand spiritual quest that led us to the summit of the mountain.
Like we achieved it.
Exactly. But the relentless biblical narrative is God saying, I found you first. Because we could not make our way up to God, God came all the way down to us. That is the true, staggering meaning of the incarnation. It wasn't God sitting on a distant, pristine throne demanding we figure out the maze. It was God stepping into the dirt, coming all the way down to exactly where we are.
Wow. So bringing this all directly back to you, listening to this, and the actual mechanics of your everyday life, like tomorrow morning, this week, the wilderness became Bethel, which literally translates to the house of God.
Yeah.
But it didn't become Bethel because the sand and rocks of that specific desert were inherently magical or holy. It became the house of God simply because God was there.
And that profound principle applies to whatever spaces you will occupy this week. When you leave a place of worship, you do not leave God behind in the pews. God's presence does not move with geography. It moves with people.
And as the pastor powerfully reminded us, this means the chaotic, noisy streets of New York City can be Bethel. Your mundane, frustrating Monday morning commute on the subway can be Bethel. That sterile hospital room smelling of bleach and anxiety can be Bethel.
Absolutely anywhere.
Even the lonely apartment where tears fall when no one else is watching any of these seemingly ordinary or painful places can instantly become the house of God.
Because the God we are talking about is not a God who merely visits certain zip codes on the weekends. He intimately walks with his people. The fundamental issue we face is never his absence. The issue is our awareness.
Remember those night vision goggles?
Right.
The presence is already in the room. You aren't creating a signal. You are just tuning your receptors to a room that is already occupied. We have to stop checking our spiritual phones for bars, constantly wondering if we've wandered out of range. You cannot wander off the map because the map itself exists within God.
Which leaves us with this really profound sense of freedom. You do not have to strive to summon God into your pain or your stress. He is Nitzov. He is already standing there.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, we want to leave you with a provocative thought to carry with you. If it is true that you do not need to strive or put on a perfect face or travel to a specific holy place to bring God into your darkest or most ordinary spaces today, how does recognizing that he has already arrived change the way you will walk into your workplace tomorrow? May you walk into tomorrow, whatever it holds, carrying the ultimate confession. Surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it.